There's so many Dutch people already.
Like the band Europe, Final Countdown.
We're almost live, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you're calling from. Welcome to another episode of Teams Rooms Tech Talk. Jimmy, it feels good to be back. It's been a minute.
It's been a minute. We haven't had a tech talk in a very long time, but today's topic is really, really important to our community, Michelle. A lot of people go out and they start talking about, all right, how do we do this? How do we do that? We're going to get a little bit technical today, I think.
I'm afraid we are. Before we jump in, let's shout out a couple of people that are already in the chat. Tom, we see you. Jean, good to see you joining from France. Graham, amazing to have you here. Adam, it's been a minute. Marcella, Dutch folks are representing today. I see Canada in here as well. I see UK. I see North Carolina, New Delhi even. Thanks so much for joining. I think this is the biggest group we've ever had on a Teams Rooms Tech Talk. So let me do a very quick round of introductions. So we have from Microsoft, Jimmy Vaughan, Michel, Bouman, you hopefully know us already. Then we have Matt Slomka, who's also a fan of the show. I think this is your third or fourth time back on the show.
That, yeah.
Right, so you're the biggest fan I think that we have. Nancy, good to have you here. And then we have Andrew and Marius joining us from PEXIP as well. Jimmy, what are we going to be talking about today?
So the team that's here from PEXIP is from the product team, and so is Nancy. So we're talking to the people that actually brought this solution. And again, I just want to say this is an important part. This is a pro feature. You know, we talk about pro all the time when we talk about licenses, and we say, hey, you need the pro license. And why do you need the pro license? Well, it's for features like this. This feature that we're going to be talking about with SIP and H.323 calling is really important to customers who are still working on some legacy devices, some things like that, but also are interacting with customers that may have these solutions as well. It's the ability to bring these other calling types into a Teams meeting. And Matt, I think you're going to show us some demos because it's really sort of easy to do.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we'll get a demo rolling today and show off, A, how to configure it, and B, what does it actually look like when it works on your MTR?
Can we start with what SIP H.323 actually is, Nancy?
Yes, it is a protocol, right, that is used from what you call, I'm going to say, quote unquote, legacy, because this is devices that companies are deploying today. But basically, it is non-Teams devices that use this protocol to communicate, right, to send video and to send audio. That's what SIP and H.323 are. Those are two different protocols.
Okay, good stuff. Thanks.
It's
Matt,
been a while since you produced, Michelle.
Hey man, I'm trying to figure out all these buttons.
It's trying to figure out the buttons and trying to go through it.
I'm so used to producing selling Microsoft Teams rooms on Friday mornings or afternoons, which is a very fast-paced show, that I need to get used to this slower pace again.
But I mean, we can go faster if you want.
But Nancy brought up the great point. There's a protocol that actually goes through. And what we're going to introduce today is the ability for your Teams rooms really to sort of interact with those protocols. And our friends at PEXIP, they're the first to actually come to market, but I think we're going to have a whole bunch of overview from them later. So why don't we start? Why don't we throw up the slide, Michelle, and why don't we sort of talk about what we're going to do here, and Matt, what you're going to actually demo, because what we want to get through today is that we are enabling your Teams rooms on Windows to make and receive SIP and 323 calls. And this isn't CVI. This isn't a technology that's been there before. This is something new that we're introducing, right, Matt?
Exactly, Jimmy. So this is a new capability that we're adding into Teams Rooms. So if you remember from the Link Room system and Skype Room system days, there was an option to dial that SIP URI, and we leveraged what was the Skype for Business and Link infrastructure to do that. And now it wasn't native SIP, and it didn't support H.323 at all. It was Skype SIP. This is changing that entirely, and this is actually leveraging a third-party provider to do that transcoding, though. So, and we'll get into in the next couple slides, kind of describing through it. But what it is it's a native Teams call from the device out. So you don't have to change anything in your network infrastructure. You don't have to change anything in how you do stuff on your corporate network to manage any of this today. But you can make and receive SIP or H.323 calls from your native Teams rooms today. You get bidirectional audio, you get video, you get screen sharing, and you get dual screen. So not only do you get to utilize both of your screens in your Teams room, but if you need to share content, you can plug your laptop in and share HDMI content directly into that meeting and directly to whatever that SIP platform is that you're dialed into, be it another SIP endpoint, a bridge, any of those sorts of things.
Interesting. For those joining us today, if you have any questions, make sure to pop them in the chat. We have so many experts on the call today. I'm sure we'll get most of them answered during the session.
Yeah, and I think that's the key is that, Matt, we had a subset of this before. Now we've actually really expanded it, and now we're doing a lot of sort of abilities inside of Teams rooms to not only do the Teams features, but to do those one-off calls that aren't your expected calls inside of their rooms. We want people to actually use Teams, and why do we want people to use Teams? Michel, we've had Inspire this week, and we introduced what? Copilot, and Copilot. So we want to really sort of get that into this thing, but we know that customers are using SIP and H.323, and with our partners who are here today with PEXIP, we're actually going to jump into some demo things. So Matt,
I think Matt just lost power. He should be back any second now.
Good.
He should be. Yeah, he did lose power. He's about to jump back on the call. Nancy, what are you seeing most when it comes to questions from both partners and customers in the ecosystem?
I didn't hear your question. Sorry, there was somebody else.
What are you hearing most? What are the most frequently asked questions that you get from customers and partners?
So how do I get this enabled? What do I need to set this in my Teams rooms? How does it work? Right? Okay. So oh, there you go.
Yeah. So how does it work?
So you need a Teams room with a Pro license, and you need to configure the Teams room after you have acquired the Pro license, and you have to configure and create a new policy that is going to enable your Teams room to place and receive external and internal calls. So here in number 2, it explains what you would need to do to set up the room. On the top part, you will see the prerequisites. What is it that you actually need to enable this from your room? So first one, you need a SIP H.323 that we already explained what it was, calling provider in the tenant where you have your rooms. Today, we have PEXIP available, and we have Marius and Andrew from PEXIP here. You will need 4.17 or higher version of the Teams Rooms app. You will need the Pro license, and of course, you need to set up the configuration that I just explained. So in number 2, in the setup instructions, there is like a screenshot, yes. Instructions of what is it that how you set up the policy that you need to create in order to enable the room. So you go to you have your Teams room, you have your Pro license, you go to PowerShell, and you run this command. And then you assign your new policy to your Teams Rooms account that you want to be able to use this, that have a Pro license, and then you will be able to use the feature. So it is very straightforward.
Is that easy? Matt, we have before we get into that, there is a question already, and I would love to make sure that we just want to make sure we answer most questions. Will it support, or does it support multi-party call-in, either ad hoc or scheduled calls?
So we usually don't schedule calls, right? We schedule meetings. And this is like an ad hoc call, like I grab the phone and I call you, right? I don't know how many people do that today with phones, but we do that. This is like an ad hoc call and it is a one-to-one call. In the slide before, I think we have an example, the third in the bottom. I don't know if we can back. Yeah, that one. So we have that poly, I'm forgetting the name of that.
Like how I just grabbed an RMX 4000 and dropped it in the slide.
which is a bridge, right? It is a SIP H.323 address. It is not an endpoint. So it will enable you to call from your Teams rooms with a Pro license into that bridge where other people will be connected.
Right. Marius, anything you want to add to this?
Yeah, so good to mention sort of when asking about multi-party calling, some users sort of think about dialing multiple addresses at the same time. This is something some VTC devices did maybe 10 years ago. It's not that common anymore. So for this feature, you dial one SIP address at the time. But as Nancy explained, that can be into sort of an older SIP-based bridge, like, for example, this wonderful Poly RMX that you found, Matt. Also worth adding, when doing those scenarios, most people will also rely on a feature that is not there yet, but that will come later this year, and that is the ability to enter DTMF codes. So that's already there on the MTR, but that is support we will add later this year, and then that will sort of be a feature you can actually take advantage of.
Right. Before we jump into the demo, because I'm okay with slides, but Matt, when you show me this stuff, that's when it really starts.
That's when we know, right?
Yeah. So another question from Leonard is: you should be able to connect via SIP H.323 to call on a bridge, not just one-to-one. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. But sort of to make proper use of that, you will very often need the ability to enter PIN codes, and that is sort of an addition coming later this year. So
and then
dial endpoints, and you can also receive calls, right? Which I'm sure Matt will cover later as well. But sort of today you can dial endpoints and you can dial SIP addresses, and later this year you will also be able to enter PIN codes and do other things over DTMF, as some of these older systems do require interaction that way.
Okay, and then last one before we jump into Matt's demo. Excuse me. Are there any prerequisites for the VC device to meet before accepting the call?
I can probably take a stab at that one as well. It depends where this sort of SIP H.323 provider is, but I'm going to keep it simple. If it can be dialed from the internet, you can be dialed from that cloud service. We can dive a little bit more into the details, but I think at this point, let's keep it high level. Most SIP and H.323 systems are compatible with this.
Yeah, I was going to say that the only prerequisite is they can accept SIP and 323 calls. I mean, kind of that's where we live, and that's what we want to do. I mean, that's sort of what we're looking at is, yeah, we want to connect to these systems. So the prerequisites are, hey, your system has to be able to accept these calls, or else you're not going to be able to connect to them. So there is some challenges that happen with that, but I think we'll see more of this. Matt, why don't we jump into the demo? Why don't you share your screen so that we can sort of understand exactly where we are at this point?
Yes. So
and keep those questions coming, by the way.
Yeah.
We'll make sure everything gets answered.
Should be sharing my screen here in a second, Michel, and you can grab that.
Yep, you're good. Yep, we can see it.
All right, so I've got a couple of different windows open here. I've got both a PowerShell window, and I've signed in to Teams Admin PowerShell to walk through configuring the PowerShell commandlets. We're going to keep it really short and sweet, but just want to be able to walk through and show how to do this for everybody. And then I've also got a remote view of the MTR that's behind me, and we're going to make a test call using what we're going to configure here. So we're going to walk through kind of both pieces today. So what I want to show first is I'm logged into Teams Admin PowerShell here. And what you're going to say is, all right, so great. So I've only got 3 steps here in our little slide that we've walked through. But the first one that you're going to notice is when you're creating this new PowerShell policy, you're going to assign to your MTRs to allow them to make and receive SIP and H.323 calls. You're going to need to figure out what is this area code thing here that I need to do. And maybe you set up your CVI provider years ago and you don't have it written down anywhere. You don't know where to find it. You don't know what it is. You can actually go through your existing tenant policies and find the configuration for this. So if you run a get CS video interrupt service provider commandlet, you can find, hey, here's what my configuration is that I need to use, and here's what the area code is that I need to use to get my provider. So what you're going to see here is it's going to spit out the only one that I've got set up in my demo tenant here, which is Pexit. So you're going to see that this application ID here, this is the area code ID that you're going to need for the next set of configuration. So if you're setting up this net new, there's a set of policies that you have to do to configure this in your tenant. And then your provider will give you that area code ID. If you set up your stuff a while ago and you just want to know how to do it or how to find it, great, you can go find it right now. So then the next piece is let's create our new video interop policy so that we can actually set up our MTRs to be able to make outbound SIP calls. So now I already wrote this ahead of time because you don't want to sit and watch me type all of this out, but I've gone through and written the same configuration that you see here in our setup slide and just typed it all in, pasted it. You'll notice that I have my area code ID in there as well, so that you've got that piece already ready to go. And I'm just going to hit enter and configure.
I'm so happy, Matt. I'm so happy that you're not sharing your phone number this session. So backstory: we did a big boot camp. 3,000 people joined, and we did the same thing for Asia. And Matt accidentally showed a couple of his phone numbers during the session, which is quite interesting. So he has
Don't
learned
worry,
from
I'll
his
show it
mistakes.
again in a
We
minute.
won't see it here.
Don't worry, I'll show it again in a minute when I show the screen from my MTR behind me. I've changed that phone number a bunch of times after all these demos. But that's okay, so that nobody ends up just calling behind me. But all right, so we've gone ahead and now configured a video teleconferencing policy in our Teams tenant. And you'll see here that it's enabled. We've enabled external receive, internal receive, external calling, and internal calling across the board. And we can talk through in greater detail what all of those mean. And your different providers can give some of that information too. But we've configured it in the tenant. And now what I want to do is assign it to the Teams room that's behind me so that I can actually make outbound calls using this policy. So I'm going to go ahead and use the grant policy that you see in step 3 there and assign it to the account that's behind me. So I'm going to go ahead and just do that assignment here. It's going to assign it to that account. We are done. So it's a really easy, straightforward policy. You can also just do this at a global level too if you want to assign it to all of your MTRs without having to assign to individual resource accounts. For the sake of the demo here, I created a unique policy and assigned it to a unique device. You can also just do this with global ones if you'd rather do that instead. And now we're on our MTR. And Michel, here's my phone number for you.
Yeah, thanks. Yep, everybody. No, but hey, we asked people to take selfies, and we got 200 selfies. We can ask 200 people to call you.
Please don't. But what you're going to see here is a standard Teams room leveraging the new home screen experience. This works in the legacy home screen experience as well, but leveraging the new home screen experience, we're going to click the call button. And now what you're going to have here is a new drop down on the side. And so now by default, this is making a Teams call. You're going to make an outbound PSTN call, or you're going to call somebody just within your organization or external to your org. You can type someone's name in. But if you want to make a SIP or H.323 call, you can select which one am I going to call. Okay, so I'm going to pick that I want to make a SIP call. And now I want to make a SIP call because I want to actually be able to call Maris, who's sitting with a SIP endpoint directly behind him. And for those looking closely, it looks like it's a Cisco endpoint of sorts sitting there. So I'm going to call him directly now. And you're actually going to see for the MTR behind me here that's a little cut off, you'll see it there, and then you'll see it behind him as well. So I'm going to just dial his now so that we are ready to go. And what this is going to do is it's going to make an outbound call to PECSIP service, which is then going to translate it into a SIP call. So everything on my device looks like a Teams meeting. Everything that you see on the endpoint looks like Teams. I can still mute, unmute, control volume, do any of those sorts of things, but you'll see now the back of my head appearing there as well.
So this just made the SIP call between the two endpoints, and we had 3 steps to set this up. That's the key. We have a ton of questions, Michel, inside of the
Yeah,
thing.
let's jump in. Where were we? Here we go. Leonard, another question. If you embed any pin codes, etc., within the dial string, will that work to cope with no DTMF?
So I can probably take that one. In some scenarios, it will. So some systems you can dial sort of meeting number dot pin code. That will work. In other systems, you can dial meeting number ** pin code. That will also work. The old way of Polycom dialing with IP address ## meeting number will probably not work. So most of those scenarios will work, but not all of them. And we will document which of those dial strings will work. So there are some workarounds until that feature will be there with live DTMF as well.
So is that the same answer to this question?
It looks like Mark answered the question too.
Yeah, exactly. Here we go. How does H.323 handle quality of service for real-time multimedia communication, and what are the challenges ensuring consistent quality of service levels across the
This
network?
question actually seems like a general H.323 question and not something that we're sort of focusing on, which is the Teams implementation to the H.323 calling side, if I'm right, Marius?
Yeah, to some extent, you're right, because whenever you connect to Teams, everything happens in the Microsoft cloud, right? And the sort of interop will also run in Azure. So for most customers, this will just happen over internet. In some regions, there are specific requirements to keep things on the net for some of those older systems, and we do have ways of supporting that as well. I don't think I'll deep dive into all of those options today. That would be a very, very long discussion. But there are some alternatives for the customers with very specific requirements as well.
Right.
Yeah, and I will say the other piece of it is for the part that most organizations would be largely concerned about, which is QoS across their corporate network. This is a Teams call. So
Yeah.
so long as you're already handing QoS for Teams for your MTR egress to the internet, that piece is handled across the board, whether it's a Teams call or one of the interop calls that we're introducing today. So for that piece, they're still in the same scenario without any change to anything.
Jimmy, there are two questions for you. One, why does all this stuff still require PowerShell?
PowerShell is the base of everything that we do. We want the interface to actually be there, but we can extend PowerShell much quicker than we can so many of these other interfaces and build a web interface and things like that. Nancy, I think these kind of things are the kind of things that we're looking at, putting in Teams Admin Center, putting into the Pro Portal, putting into different places so that we can do it. But we don't want to wait for all of that development to go through. So we're looking at PowerShell and we're looking and saying, hey, we want to get our customers there as quickly as we can while we work on the back end information. Right, Nancy?
Correct. And we're already working on putting it in the Teams Admin Center. So yes.
Good.
Okay, good stuff. And then the last one for you, Jim, before we move on.
Yes.
I saw you in a purple shirt all over LinkedIn last week, so you're gonna love this one from Graham from Neat. When is it coming to MTRA devices?
Nancy, I will hand that to you.
Graham. I think I talk to Graham more than I talk to my family. So it is. We are going to understand first. Look at how much this is used from the Windows rooms, right? This was a big effort that the teams have been working. It is not just the teams product engineering group. We have with our partners within Microsoft and also with Pexip. So when is it coming to MTR devices? Still TBD. We're going to look into how the usage on the Teams rooms on Windows, and then analyze if it makes sense to make it in the Android rooms.
Yeah, and I think that's the key, Nancy. We don't want to sort of sit back and say, hey, we're going to do it for only this one. We'll get to Android, and as long as that's a customer feature that is widely used and widely adopted, 100% that development will come to all the systems as we can. But just because we're releasing it on Windows doesn't always mean that, hey, it's coming to Android right away. Right. I think the Android side is really feature-rich options. But I still say, Michel, you and I talk about it all the time. The one feature that every single Teams room has is walk up and hit that join button. That single touch join is the one feature that every single customer in the world needs to make it as easy when they're in the office as they are at home.
Yes, correct. I think we had all the questions. Oh no, there was one about merging. Oh, here we go. Is there a possibility to merge a Teams call with a SIP call?
No. and I would ask why. We have other interop options for that. Put your meeting in Teams or put your meeting in SIP. Don't try to bridge the two of them together in some fashion. Let's live in a new world or the old world, not both.
I agree. Yeah. There's also a licensing question. Do we want to keep that until the end or do it now?
On the Pexip side, I think we can keep it. I think we can jump in because the Pexip guys do have a whole bunch of information to share. I have it on my screen. But Matt, before we get out of the demo, I think it's important. You said it at the top, but people that use this SIP dialing can actually have dual screens, can control all of those solutions, and have a better experience on the call than they have been in the past, right? With things like CVI and other options. And that's what I think we want to get forward and really want to drive home with everybody is this is a new option. It's offered from our friends at PEXIP right now. Other providers will be coming, but it does offer some added flexibility outside of what had been available previously.
Exactly, Jimmy. And I think one other thing to kind of call out is, as I've had conversations with customers around deploying MTR, there's always an edge case of, hey, we need to dial into this SIP service because we do this large broadcast event where we join in and it's SIP and it's hosted by another organization, but our CEO needs to join that call. And we're not going to do anything until you can do that. Well, now you can adopt, and 99% of your organization's meetings are on Teams, but that 1% of calls where you need to make a SIP or an H.323 call to dial into some other service, this solves that problem without having to go through any extra hurdles, have different hardware, maintain different sets of infrastructure along the way across your network. You're ready to go just with the devices we've already got in place today.
Yes, correct. We want to head over to maybe PEXIP team. There we go. Thanks.
Yeah, I think it's time for the PEXIP team because you've seen the capabilities, but now I think it's time for PEXIP to say, PEXIP, number one, how do people actually get this solution and how do they contact you? But added to that, what options do I have? I know, Michel, you said there was a question in the chat about licensing and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
From the Microsoft side, I think we covered it, Nancy. It is a pro license feature only. That means if you've got standard, if you've got basic, if you've got any other license type, you will not get it. Again, adding value to that pro license that we as Microsoft really want everybody to get to. And we are adding features every single month to that pro license. But that, from the Microsoft side, that's what you need. Then we've got PEXIP. So Marius, Andrew, why don't you guys take it over and tell them how they can get it on the PEXIP side?
Yeah, so thanks. I'll go ahead and, if you don't mind, Marius, I'll jump in here, but please, by all means, keep me honest. First off, we have both service and self-hosted solutions, so this does work for both. So regardless of what type of customer you are from PEXIP, we accommodate both deployment models. And then in terms of how do I get this, there's sort of three main categories. There are those customers who are already PEXIP CVI customers, regardless of which sort of license plan you use to get that CVI. We are including this capability with that. So reach out to your PEXIP account manager and discuss what those details mean. But if I don't have CVI, can I get this? Absolutely. You do not need CVI, right? We expect customers are migrating to MTRs over time. We expect that many won't have a CVI contract or a need for it. So can I get this? Yes, absolutely. This will run standalone without CVI. You still need the license from ourselves, PEXIP, or we're partnering with Poly as well, who's reselling this. So you have two different providers, if you will, that can offer the solution. And then the third category is maybe I have a competitive CVI provider. Can I get this solution from PEXIP? Absolutely. This will run alongside and we can enable your MTR calling if you have competitive CVI solution as well. So no worries there. And I think you mentioned sort of how do you get in touch? Contact link there is really the key thing. By all means, reach out to the link there or your PEXIP account manager and we'll help you get set up and started.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Thanks. In what scenarios, Matt, would you say that people should start looking into this solution? I kind of feel, I think before we started the event, somebody said, is this actually still a thing? Right? And then somebody in chat answered something about 20-year-old standards. Where is it? Here is it. What 20 years of interruptible standards outside of what Microsoft has decided to do? What are the ideal scenarios where a customer would still be looking into solutions like this? Is it when they go from one service to another? What is it?
So I look at this in a couple different scenarios, Michel. I look at this as hey, we're trying to migrate. And so we've got an existing video conference estate where we're doing SIP calling today. We're hosting on-prem bridges. We're doing that conversation, but we're moving to MTR and there's still meetings that are hosted on-prem for one reason or another. How do I get my endpoints into those meetings? This is a great example of that. Great, you can leverage the SIP calling capability on your MTR to land in that space. And then as you slowly migrate and have more and more Teams meetings, you can look in the other direction of, okay, how do I get my SIP endpoints into my Teams meetings instead? And kind of build that bridge and that conversation there. But this makes it interop in both directions. The other piece that I would look at this for is, great, my organization has shifted entirely to Teams. We're on Teams. But the calls that I have with customers all the time is, hey, we need to meet our customer wherever they are. I meet with a lot of customers who have customers, and they, roll out thousands of Teams rooms and then go, hey, we need to join a Zoom meeting. We need to join a WebEx meeting. That's why we introduced direct guest join and bridging into those conversations. Those same customers still have conversations where, hey, I have a customer who insists on meeting on their Polycom RMX bridge once a month. Okay, fine. You can do that now with your Teams room without having to have different third-party applications or anything crazy set up in your infrastructure. You can just go ahead and dial that string from your MTRs and enable your employees to do that and make it one seamless experience and make MTR that much more powerful for those scenarios.
Gotcha. We have a question from Robbie Ronnie. I love that name, by the way. Is it possible to dial into a SIP-based meeting, for example, WebEx, Zoom, etc.?
Isn't that what we just showed, Michel?
So it works.
I think that's the answer is yes, right?
Yeah. So the answer is yes. The caveat would be watch, because DTMF doesn't work yet. So if you need to dial a conference ID, you're not going to get in. Now, there are formats of those strings that include the DTMF codes already all chunked in. So you've got your meeting ID, your conference ID, and whatever else in it. Then it'll work. The DTMF part doesn't work yet. That's coming later this calendar year, at which point then you'll be able to dial that conference ID too when you land there.
Good. I also have a question. Maybe this is for the PEXIP team. Jimmy, would you mind going back a slide?
I will.
With the PowerShell?
Yes.
With the PowerShell commands somewhere? Because the one thing that stood out for me, the area code command is kind of confusing.
Yeah, Matt showed how he got that.
But maybe all the parameters that need to be set here, where do you get those from?
So those you will get from your provider. So PEXIP in this case. So for all the customers that are using sort of the general cloud service, that's already there in the documentation. So customers need just to go to pexip.com/rooms/teams/rooms, the link that Andrew showed earlier, and sign up, and they will sort of get the documentation. But for all service customers, that is sort of the same one. The reason sort of this can also be something different is some of the customers and some of the users on this call asked a lot of specific questions on QoS integrating into their networks. Some of them may choose to host their own PEXIP environment. And then, of course, they would put in their own app ID there. It's all part of our documentation, but this is effectively something you need to get from the provider, being it PEXIP or Poly.
Okay, I'll try, because Andrew just sent us a nice link that we can use. So I'll put that in the chat right now. I'll put that up on the screen. This will show you, I think, in detail how to get started. Question from another one from Leonard. And Leonard, thanks so much for being so generous with the questions. For the option to get this without having to have a CVI service, what are the advantages and disadvantages?
So CVI, I think there's some echoes on somebody. So CVI is for meetings, right? For scheduled meetings. You use CVI. If you have CVI in your organization, you will be able to use your VTCs or your SIP endpoints to join scheduled meetings, right? Doesn't necessarily allow it doesn't allow a one-to-one call between a Teams room and a VTC endpoint. So SIP H.323 dialing does allow the ad hoc calls between the Teams rooms and the SIP H.323 endpoint or bridge. So that is the difference.
Good stuff. Let me see if there's any more questions before we close this one out. I don't think so. Jimmy, or maybe Matt or the PEXIP team, or maybe you and Nancy. Anything urgent we need to make sure that we cover today before we wrap this one up?
I think we covered a whole bunch of stuff. I think we saw the live demo. I think it's been great. Nancy, PEXIP team, I want to thank you guys for bringing this, because, although I know that I've been a little bit like, okay, H.323 and everything else, I have been reached out to by a large number of customers, Michelle, you too, who have said, we really do need this. And we need this to come into play. I mean, as we get people to Teams, as we get people to Teams rooms themselves, this sort of adds that functionality that, like you said, Matt, is that one-off of what people need, and is just stopping them from maybe adopting it even further into their organization. So by adding this service, I think we've really sort of checked off another one of those boxes for customers to say, hey, now I can put Teams rooms into my organization.
Yes, yes, I agree. I agree. Thanks everybody for coming out. For me, the biggest learning was to see how easy it is
Three
to set this up.
steps.
I always thought
Three
it was
steps.
very, very, very complicated, but just maybe the most complicated thing is not making any typos in the PowerShell commands. But other than that, it's actually quite easy to do so. So thanks everybody for joining us. Thanks so much for everybody joining us online in the chat and asking all these questions. Jimmy, you want to do the make sure you like and subscribe stuff that you
Make
do
sure
so
you
well?
like and subscribe on the Ultimate Influencer. You know, you got to subscribe to the YouTube channel. Make sure to hit that subscribe button. And with that, Michelle, I'm going to thank everybody. Why don't you go ahead and take us out of here? Thanks, everybody.
Thanks everybody.